Hi, I'm Maria Breslin and welcome to Maria Breslin Sewing Tuition. I'm going to give you some tips and tricks today about sewing with knitted fabrics. But firstly, what I'd like to just say is I hope you're all keeping safe and well in these really difficult times. So anyway, what this video today is going to cover is some little techniques I've learned along the way for sewing with knitted fabrics. So these are the basics you need to know before you start to sew with fabrics. The first thing is that you need to select a sewing pattern that is actually being designed for sewing with knitted fabrics, and it will tell you on the back of the envelopes when it gives suggested fabrics, and then there it will tell you whether it's knitted fabrics, and that's really important. Now the other thing that's really important, a lot of people don't know this, is we have a stretch gauge on the back of an envelope. And that stretch gauge will tell you a specific width of fabric has to stretch so far, and that's important actually to make sure, because if you don't do this, the fabric can't stretch to the right width and it won't fit you after you've made it, so that's really important. And the other thing I always like to do, and I highly recommend you all do it, is actually to read the back of the pattern. Here it tells you a lot of information, what notions, what haberdashery you want, how much fabric you want, so you can actually get that all together before you start. The other thing is I like to do is actually also go through the instructions inside the envelope, because then you can decide whether you've got the knowledge just to go ahead with the project and you know exactly what you know, all the techniques. Or if not, if you need to acquire the techniques, you can actually put a bit of time aside to learn those techniques. So that's really a good idea. And before we move on, the other thing is, if you're not aware of this, fabrics sometimes have a one-way design. So imagine a fabric with a rose that's wants to go upwards. So it's important that you follow the directions in the pattern for one-way designs, otherwise you'll have a rose going up that way and down on the back. So that's really, again, just check the pattern and everything, all the information that's given to you. So from here we're going to move on to construction of the garment. Now, if you haven't got an overlocker and you're actually sewing with an ordinary sewing machine, there's a couple of tips here that's really you really need to know. If you need to put a zigzag, what we call building stretch, into the seam. If you actually just do a seam with a straight stitch, when you pull it, it's just going to pop, it won't hold together. So on some machines you actually have a built-in stretch stitch. Some you have to put it on yourself with a zigzag stitch. Now I get asked a lot here what kind of width should it be and what kind of length, but there isn't a specific setting for this. It will depend on the stretch, how your fabric stretch. So this fabric, which I made this garment with here, this stretches an awful lot. So let me just show you how far this will stretch. So you have to do some testing off when you're actually doing something like that. What I did actually to get a good stretch built into this, I actually used a stretch stitch on my machine, and it was amended the width to 2.5 mil and the length was for 2 mil. So I'll just show you, this really does now stretch nicely. And that's not going to pop. So that's really important. That's building in stretch into your seams. Now, if you're lucky enough to have an overlocker, you're going to have no problem at all. You just put you set up your machine, your overlocker for a full thread, and it will just do it all for you. And it will just it's got a naturally built-in stretch. Okay, so that's really important. So now I've given you a few tips and a bit of knowledge for working with knitted fabric. I'm going to actually discuss constructing New Look 6097. What I would say about this dress pattern, it isn't for the beginner to sew with. I'd say you need to be an intermediate sewer and have some knowledge of sewing with knitted fabrics. There's quite a lot of detail and there's a lot of control that needs to be put in for the collar and the pleats at the front there. So what I'd like to do when I cut out with in knitted fabric, I actually like to use a rotary cutter. I know a lot of people are a bit scared of them, but if you get used to them, they're a brilliant way of cutting out knitted fabric. What I'd also suggest is you use weights. And why I like this method of cutting out is you're not lifting your fabric, so you're not distorting as you're cutting. So when you get the scissors, you can actually lift fabric and it distorts it. So have a go. I highly recommend a rotary cutter, but do keep your hand out of the way. Okay, so after I read the construction instructions for this garment, one of the things that I wasn't sure about is that it does a double face. It suggested you use a double facing on the inside here. I actually decided I didn't want to do it that way, and I've got a couple of samples which I'll get a close-up later on for you, which has, let me find it, let's have a look there. So this has a double facing inside. The only problem is when you're trying to encase a collar in here, it can be quite difficult. So what I did instead, I drafted my own facing. If you have a look there, it's a flat facing, which any of you that sews and put a facing on, that's what I did with this. It makes a really nice flat finish down the front. There's no bulk, you can encompass the collar, and I'm really pleased with that, and I highly recommend you do that as well. So what I'm going to do, when you're actually putting a garment together like this, you've down the front here, and when you put a facing on, you've got the fabrics, they're going to move. That's what happens when you put two fabrics together and you're top stitching them. The next thing that's really important when you're actually sewing with knits is actually prevent stretch. And you have to be very careful in sewing knitted fabrics. One of the big things people find is they've got gaping necklines when they do it, and they think, what's happened? Well, because the fabric can stretch, it can end up, an inch longer if you're not careful. So top tip is, even if the pattern doesn't say it on the front here, when I was doing this, I stayed stitched both sides, so it couldn't move. So that's really important. And the other thing you do is when you actually, so I was interfacing the collar, so I put my fine shear fusible onto my collar after it was all cut out, and then what I like to do is actually pin my pattern piece, my pieces of fabric that have been fused back onto my pattern and trim and make sure it is exactly the right size. So that's really a good thing to do, and that way you don't get twisted collars and cuffs or anything like that. So the next thing is actually, because these have got pockets here, which I love wearing pockets, but I don't like them if they gape. So the top tip there is actually put some stay on the pockets. Now the one I quite like to use is the one I use from Vilene, and it's just a nice sort of fine tape. And the most important thing to do is to measure your pattern from A to B, and you don't put anything extra on, and that will actually stop this from bagging out. So that makes a big difference. It prevents that horrible bagging you can get with pockets. Now the other thing is, when I'm doing this, I try not to tack only when I have to. But I would highly recommend you all tack when you're actually making this garment, because say down the front here, you put your facing on, you've turned it over, you've trimmed it, all the normal things you do when you're sewing, and then you're going to top stitch. Now if you don't tack and you think it all looks flat and you've got it all nice and pinned, when you put it over under the sewing machine, even with a walking foot, it's going to slightly twist. And then you've probably all had the experience when this area here has got a slight twist in it. So tack it all, press it, make it really perfect, and you won't get that twist. It'll really look very professional. Now the other thing to do is actually use tacking thread. It's a lot softer, so you can get it out a lot easier after you've actually done your top stitching, and it will really prevent a lot of hassle at the end of it. So that's a really, yeah, I just highly recommend you do your tack when you're doing this kind of construction. When you're doing the side seams, then that doesn't matter really, you can pin it, it won't move, but this will move if you don't. So that's really important. Now the other thing, the feet I used when I was making this, when I was actually making this dress, I used on my ordinary sewing machine, I used my edge stitch foot, or you might know this as stitching the ditch foot. I used my 1/4 inch foot, and I used my ordinary straight foot. So my 1/4 inch foot, I used it for my top stitching, so I got it all uniform. My edge stitch foot, I used it on the edge of the belt, so I've got a beautiful straight stitch all the way round. And the construction, what I used was I did use my overlocker to put all the vertical seams together. I did use, I'm lucky I've got a cover stitch machine, and I did use the cover stitch machine at the bottom. If you don't have a cover stitch machine, it doesn't matter what you use a twin needle in your ordinary sewing machine. Now the other thing, another good tip here, if you are doing this and you feel that you're getting a little ridge, or it's not sitting nicely, if you've got some wash away stabiliser, you can actually put that underneath and you'll actually get a better finish. So when I made the belt, I've used a Vilene medium weight iron-on stabiliser. Now the reason I chose that stabiliser is that it was just going to make the belt a bit more pliable. For this design, I didn't want a really rigid belt. The other thing I actually also used, I did put eyelets in the belt. I like eyelets, it stops the belt from slipping, and it gets really nice, it gives a really nice effect. So just to recap, check your pattern, check it's made for knitted fabric, check the stretch, make sure you put your pattern, your fabric pieces back on your pattern after you've actually fused it, do your tacking and prevent your fabric from moving, and you will get some really good results. The other thing I should have mentioned right at the beginning, it's important what needles you use as well. It's best to use something like a ballpoint or a stretch needle. And the other thing I like to do is I actually try to take the pressure down off from your pressure foot. If you can't do that, just slightly lower your tension, and you'll find that it will run better, and your fabric will feed better. Hi guys, this is the finished product. I'm really pleased with the result. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I really hope it helps you with your knitted sewing projects. Please like and subscribe to my YouTube channel. I'd love to hear from you in the comments box. Happy sewing, and please stay safe.